How do you fall for the most dangerous man in Monaco, without even knowing his name? Celine Davenport was about to find out, because in 3 seconds, she'd collide with him in a way that would leave them both breathless. In 3 days, she'd be questioning everything her father taught her. And in 3 weeks, she'd have no idea the man she'd just met would become both her salvation and her cage. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, she was just a girl trying not to trip in her heels. The diplomatic residence lobby gleamed like old money, marble floors, crystal chandeliers. Celine navigated the corridor with the focused precision of someone who'd rather die than make a scene. She'd been in Monaco 12 hours. 6 months at La Condamine Gallery stretched ahead. Then Paris. That was the plan, until she saw him. Celine saw him the moment he entered the diplomatic residence lobby. Impossible not to. The man walked like he owned every room he entered, flanked by 2 security guards who moved with military precision. Dark suit, darker eyes, the kind of presence that made conversations stop mid-sentence. She froze halfway across the marble floor, her pulse kicking hard against her ribs, storm blue eyes locked onto hers, her breath caught. She couldn't look away. Celine's artist brain catalogued details she didn't want to notice. Mediterranean features, sharp jaw, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But his eyes stopped her completely, storm blue, the kind that warned of dangerous weather. He was looking directly at her. Fire licked through her veins, heat spreading across her skin. The questions hammered through her mind. Who is he? Why is he looking at me like that? Time slowed. The distance between them compressed into something electric, something that made her stomach clench, and her hands tremble around the folder she'd been carrying. 20 feet, 15, 10. His gaze held hers, unwavering as he moved closer with deliberate, predatory grace. Celine's heart hammered so loud she was certain he could hear it, panic clawing through her thoughts. I should move. I should look away. Then the world exploded. A deafening crash shattered the silence, metal screaming against marble, glass shattering, something massive hitting the floor with enough force to shake the chandeliers overhead. The sound was so loud it momentarily deafened her, making her ears ring. Celine's body jerked toward the noise, her mouth opening in shock, and then she was falling. No, not falling. Being taken down. Hard arms wrapped around her waist, yanking her sideways with brutal efficiency. Her back hit the marble floor, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. A solid wall of muscle pressed down on top of her, pinning her completely. One hand cradling the back of her head to keep it from cracking against the floor. Celine's hands came up instinctively, pressing against a chest that felt like warm stone beneath expensive fabric. Her fingers found the open collar of his shirt, bare skin, heat, the hammering of his heart against her palm. Her breath stopped, her entire body going rigid as the realization crashed over her. He's on top of me. I can feel him, she thought. Oh God, I can feel everything. The man covering her body was him, the one with the storm blue eyes. He was so close she could see silver flecks in his irises, feel his exhale ghost across her lips, smell cedar and salt and something darker that made heat pool low in her stomach. His weight pressed her into marble, his hand cradling her skull with surprising gentleness, while his chest moved against hers with each harsh breath. Celine's pulse thundered. She pressed her lips together, panic clawing through her thoughts. His heart is racing as fast as mine. I can feel the heat of his skin through my blouse. Stop thinking about how he feels, how he smells. Stop! One of the guards shouted from somewhere behind them. Clear, sir. The man above her didn't move immediately. His gaze locked onto hers, something electric passing between them. Then he pushed himself up with controlled strength, his hand still cradling her head. Celine stared up at him, chest heaving. Her fingers were still splayed against the warm skin visible through his open collar. The most attractive man I've ever seen just threw himself on top of me. And I don't want him to move. What's wrong with me? The thought slammed into her before she could stop it, panic and heat tangling in her chest. The man straightened to his full height, storm blue eyes scanning the room before returning to her face. Are you hurt? Celine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He extended his hand. "Let me help you up." She took it, warm, calloused, strong, and he pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. He steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "I apologize, miss. We thought—" He glanced toward the source of the noise, jaw tightening. "We thought it might be a gunshot." Celine's eyes widened. "A gunshot?" She followed his gaze and her heart plummeted. Her piano. Her mother's baby grand piano lay on its side in the entrance hall, polished mahogany cracked like broken skin, strings exposed and tangled. Her chest constricted painfully. No, not the piano. Not Mom's piano. The thought tore through her before she could stop it. The mover stood frozen nearby, faces pale. One rushed forward, wringing his hands. "I'm so sorry, miss. The dolly wheel caught on the carpet edge." "It's fine." Celine's voice barely held steady. "Accidents happen." But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. The man went very still. When she glanced up, he was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he could see straight through her composure to the grief underneath. His hand was still on her elbow. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I reacted to what I thought was a threat. I didn't mean to frighten you." Celine shook her head. "You didn't frighten me. You protected me." "Thank you." Something flickered in his eyes. He released her elbow slowly, fingers trailing away. He offered his hand formally. "Alessandro Moretti, I had business meeting with your father this morning." The name hit her like a physical blow. Alessandro Moretti. "That's Alessandro Moretti," the one my father mentioned. The one who makes him choose his words carefully. Recognition slammed through her, cold and sharp. She forced herself to take his hand. "Celine Davenport, Ambassador Davenport's daughter." Recognition flashed across Alessandro's face, but not surprise. His thumb brushed once across her knuckles before he released her hand. He knew. He knew who I was before I said anything. The realization left her breathless. Alessandro's mouth curved slightly. "Welcome to Monaco, Miss Davenport." He turned to one of his guards, speaking rapid Italian. The guard nodded and pulled out his phone. Alessandro looked back at her, expression unreadable. "Again, my apologies for the dramatic introduction. I hope the rest of your day is less eventful." He inclined his head and walked away, security detail falling into step beside him. Celine stood in the middle of the lobby, heart racing, hands trembling, the ghost of his touch burning on her skin. "Stop it." He thought there was a gunshot. He was protecting me. It didn't mean anything, she thought, pressing her palm against her chest, trying to force the words to feel true. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie, and that was how it began. Celine didn't know it yet, but she just caught the attention of the most dangerous man in Monaco. And Alessandro Moretti didn't let go of things that interested him. Ever. The next morning, Celine woke to her phone buzzing insistently. A message from the residence security desk. "Delivery for Miss Davenport. Requires signature." She threw on a robe and made her way downstairs, half asleep, expecting documents. What she found in the lobby made her breath stop. A piano. Not just any piano. A Steinway Grand, black lacquer gleaming like liquid midnight, tied with a wide white silk ribbon. Perfect. Pristine. Breathtaking. Celine's hand flew to her mouth. This can't be real, she thought, shock rooting her in place. A small card rested on the keys, heavy cream paper with a weight that spoke of money and taste. Black ink, elegant script not printed, but written by hand in confident strokes, for the one that was lost, with sincere apologies for yesterday's disruption. And below, a signature in that same bold hand, Alessandro Moretti. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the card. He sent me a piano. A Steinway. Why would he? The questions spiraled before she could stop them. The residence manager appeared at her elbow, vibrating with excitement. "It arrived at 6 this morning, Miss Davenport. Mr. Moretti's people handled everything. Delivery, tuning, placement. You're to choose where you'd like it positioned permanently." Alessandro Moretti had been on top of her for 30 seconds, had spoken to her for less than 2 minutes. And he'd replaced her mother's piano with a Steinway. She ran her fingers over the polished keys. They responded with a clear, perfect note that echoed through the marble lobby, like a promise or a warning. Her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A text from her father. "Celine, my office at 10 a.m. We need to discuss your encounter with Mr. Moretti yesterday." Celine's stomach dropped. He knows. Security cameras, witnesses, and now there's a Steinway in the lobby with Alessandro's name on it, she realized, panic flooding cold through her veins. What have I gotten myself into? She thought. She stared at the piano, at the card clutched in her hand, and in 2 hours her father would tell her exactly 3 things about Alessandro Moretti. 1, he owned half of Monaco's underground. 2, he didn't do favors without reason. 3, stay away from him. But by then it would already be too late. Celine sat across from her father in his office, the Steinway's perfect note still echoing in her memory. Richard Davenport didn't waste time. "You heard what I said, Celine." His voice was measured, diplomat calm, but his jaw was tight. "Alessandro Moretti is a dangerous man. Stay away from him." He paused, holding her gaze. "In my profession, I have to work with all kinds of people. But you stay away from them." "Understood." Celine bit her lip. "Should I send the piano back?" Richard's expression shifted, frustration mixed with resignation. No, he could take offense. "We have to keep it, unfortunately." He leaned forward. "If he contacts you, don't respond." His voice dropped lower, something harder underneath. "Don't make me have to fix this, Celine." The warning landed heavy between them. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "I barely met him." Richard studied her with those sharp diplomat's eyes that missed nothing. "The Morettis have run Monaco for the Lombardi organization for 5 generations. Old money mixed with newer, less legitimate enterprises. Alessandro handles most operations now. Lombardi organization." The words clicked into place, cold and certain. Mafia, she realized, ice spreading through her veins. Celine heard herself ask, "What kind of operations?" Richard's tone went hard, the diplomat mask slipping. "The kind where people make decisions in rooms and others don't walk away. Do you understand me?" He held her gaze unblinking. Celine's mind flashed back to the encounter. The bodyguards, the controlled movements, the scar through his eyebrow. "A story written in violence. I work with him professionally. Can't avoid it in my position." Richard paused, the weight of his next words deliberate. "But working with him and letting my daughter anywhere near him are 2 very different things." Celine lifted her chin, something defiant flashing in her chest. "I'm not a child, Dad. I'm 23. I can handle myself." Richard's intensity bled through his control. "Can you? Can you handle a man who's been groomed since birth to take over his family's interests? Who's been in situations most people can't even imagine?" Nausea rolled through her stomach, but something else coiled underneath, something that felt dangerously close to fascination. They stared at each other across the desk, protection warring with independence. Finally, Richard sighed, exhaustion creeping into his features. "I'm just trying to keep you safe." "I know." Celine squeezed his hand. "I'll be careful. I promise." But as she said the words, Celine's mind drifted back to storm-blue eyes and calloused hands and the faint scent of cedar and danger. He's connected to the mafia. He's dangerous. Everything I should stay away from, she thought. So why couldn't she stop thinking about him? 2 days later, Celine knelt on the gallery floor, cross-referencing inventory numbers with Friday's auction catalogue, learning the unglamorous side of junior curator work, memorizing which collectors preferred impressionists, which clients needed careful handling, the precise art of matching paintings to appetite. The gallery door opened, bells chiming, and when she glanced up, her breath stopped completely. Alessandro stood in the doorway in white linen that caught the sunlight perfectly, 2 bodyguards flanking him like shadows, and when their eyes met across 20 feet of polished floor, every warning her father had given came screaming back. She rose quickly and turned toward the far wall, focusing on the painting there with sudden, desperate intensity, a couple on opposite sides of a room, bodies angled toward each other but not touching, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. The brass plate read, "Study in Distance, Anaïs Laurent, 1959. Footsteps approached across the floor, quiet and deliberate, and then his voice came from right beside her. Interesting piece to hide behind. Celine's pulse kicked hard, but she forced herself to turn and meet his gaze. I'm not hiding, Mr. Moretti, I'm working. Alessandro's mouth curved as he studied the painting with what seemed like genuine interest. Interesting choice. Most people think it's a love scene. Isn't it? She heard herself ask. He turned to face her, and suddenly the gallery felt too small, the air too warm. I don't think so. To me it looks like a woman deciding how close she'll let someone get. The metaphor landed with uncomfortable precision, making her throat tighten. Maybe she thinks the man is dangerous. Or maybe she's just measuring how much danger she can handle, Alessandro said, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made heat pool low in her stomach. Celine took a small step back and gestured vaguely toward the office. We have exhibition preparations today. Visits are by appointment only. I know. Alessandro didn't move. I came anyway. Of course he did, she thought, frustration and something dangerous tangling in her chest. Why? His expression softened in a way that felt genuine, unguarded. I wanted to see you, to make sure you're all right. The honesty nearly undid her composure, making her wrap her arms around the catalogues she still held. I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for the piano, though it was too much, and my father said you might take offense if I refused. Alessandro smiled, something warm breaking through the controlled exterior. Your father knows me well, we have history, a friendship that goes back years. Celine found she couldn't look away from his eyes, and the confession escaped before she could stop it. My father told me to stay away from you. Alessandro took one step closer, his voice calm but his eyes contradicting every word. He might be right. But his gaze traced over her face, lingered on her lips, traveled down to where her pulse hammered visibly in her throat, then back up with an intensity that made breathing difficult. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly. So when I want to buy paintings for my home, will you be the one helping me? Heat flooded her face as she bit her lip, trying desperately to maintain professional distance. I'm just a newly graduated assistant, Mr. Moretti. Madame Aubert would be better suited. Alessandro looked down with a genuine smile that made him look younger, less controlled, more dangerous. I want your help. I need fresh eyes, modern perspective. She felt her own smile threatening despite every warning echoing in her head. But I don't make appointments to come here. Mr. Moretti, that's not how galleries work. Then bring your catalogue to dinner and we'll discuss which pieces might suit my home, he said. The suggestion weighted with implications that had nothing to do with art. The laugh escaped breathless and reckless. Mr. Moretti, I can't know your style without seeing your home. The words were out before she could think, before she could stop them, and immediate panic crashed through her. What are you doing? Your father was clear. This man is dangerous. Stay away, she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alessandro's smile widened with triumph. Then I'm expecting you for dinner at my home. Everything in her wanted to say yes, his voice, his eyes, the magnetic pull that made staying away feel impossible, but she forced herself to bite her lip hard and shake her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti. I can't come to your home. I think you should speak with Madame Aubert instead. She turned and walked toward the back office with measured steps that felt like retreat, her spine rigid and her shoulders tight. Don't look back, she commanded herself, even as heat spread across her neck and every nerve ending screamed to turn around. Alessandro stood motionless, watching Celine disappear through the back door, and the question turned over in his mind, like a puzzle he couldn't solve. What is it about this girl? She wasn't the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Wasn't sophisticated or worldly, or calculating like the women who usually crossed his path. Wasn't anything that should have held his interest for more than 5 minutes. But underneath that innocence he could feel something else, fire, strength, a stubborn defiance that refused to bend when powerful men gave orders. That's what draws you in, he realized with uncomfortable clarity. She's not afraid to say no, not afraid to walk away. In his world people said yes, they bent, they accommodated, they feared. Celine Davenport had just looked him in the eye and walked away. He turned back to the painting, the couple forever frozen in their careful separation, neither willing to cross the space between them first, and his jaw tightened with something that felt dangerously close to frustrated respect. Staying away from you would be best, Celine, he thought, the words hollow even as they formed, for both of us. But even as he walked toward the exit with his bodyguards falling into step beside him, Alessandro knew it was a lie. Because Celine Davenport had just become the most interesting thing in Monaco, and Alessandro Moretti didn't walk away from things that interested him, ever. Madame Aubert appeared from the back office as soon as Alessandro's guards closed the door behind them, her sharp eyes bright with curiosity. "What were you discussing with Monsieur Moretti, chérie? If he's considering purchasing, this would be very important for the gallery." Celine felt heat creep up her neck again as she set down the catalogues with hands that wanted to shake. "Yes, he's interested in acquiring pieces for his home, but he specifically requested that I show him at dinner at his residence." She paused, forcing the next words out. I declined. Madame Aubert's perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted, something like surprise mixed with concern crossing her elegant features. "Though that would have been an important opportunity for the gallery, ma chérie, but if he made you uncomfortable, I cannot insist." She touched Celine's arm lightly. "Perhaps we could both visit his home together, no? That way you wouldn't be alone." Madame Aubert turned and walked back toward her office, leaving Celine standing among the paintings, with her thoughts spinning in directions she knew were dangerous. Just business, she thought, the justification forming before she could stop it. If I sell him a painting, it could be good for my career here, and Madame Aubert would be there so I wouldn't be alone. The rationalizations came faster now, each one weakening her father's warnings a little more. Maybe Dad is being overprotective. After all, Alessandro gave me a piano worth more than most cars. He's been nothing but polite. Maybe I was too harsh with him. She moved toward the window almost without thinking, and her breath caught when she saw Alessandro on the street below, his bodyguards opening the car door as he prepared to leave. No time to overthink this, she realized, her heart suddenly racing with decision. Celine grabbed a gallery business card from the reception desk and pushed through the front door before courage could abandon her. "Mr. Moretti," she called out, her voice carrying across the narrow street. Alessandro turned, surprise flickering across his features, before his mouth curved into a smile that made her stomach flip dangerously. "Yes, Celine?" She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the interest sharpening in his eyes, and forced herself to say the words before panic could stop her. "I'm accepting your dinner invitation. I'll come tonight with the catalogue." "Don't mention Madame Aubert yet," some instinct whispered. "He might decline if he knows she's coming." Alessandro's smile widened, genuine pleasure breaking through his controlled exterior. "I'm very glad to hear that, Celine." He stepped closer, leaning down until his breath ghosted against her ear, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "Be ready at 8. I'll send a car for you." Celine's pulse kicked hard at his nearness, at the way his cologne surrounded her, cedar and danger and something darker that made thinking difficult. "Please have it pick me up here at the gallery, not at the residence." Alessandro pulled back slightly, understanding flickering in those storm blue eyes, along with something that looked dangerously close to amusement. He nodded once, his expression saying he knew exactly why she didn't want her father to see. "Of course." He turned and slid into the back seat of his car with fluid grace, the door closing with an expensive click, and Celine stood on the street watching the vehicle disappear around the corner. "What have I just done?" she thought, but underneath the panic was something else. Anticipation, excitement, the dangerous thrill of stepping off the edge of something she couldn't take back. She turned and walked back into the gallery, already wondering what she would wear and whether her father would somehow find out. But most of all, she wondered why the thought of spending an evening with Alessandro Moretti made her feel more alive than she had in months. Celine texted her father during lunch. "Having dinner with Madame Aubert tonight, don't worry about me." That afternoon she'd bought a red dress on impulse, and now at 7:45 she stood in the gallery's back office, wearing it with her light brown hair, pulled into a soft half-updo, waiting for Madame Aubert. Her phone rang. "Sherry, I'm so sorry. My husband is ill. We're heading to the hospital. You should cancel if you don't want to go alone." 7:55. The car would arrive in 5 minutes. Celine closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. "I can do this," she told herself. "He's my father's friend. What danger could possibly happen in a few hours over dinner?" Headlights swept across the windows as a black car pulled to the curb. She grabbed the portfolio and walked out with determined steps. The car climbed Monaco's winding hillside roads, the city sprawling below in a cascade of lights against the darkening Mediterranean. Celine watched the view through tinted windows, trying to calm her racing pulse. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her jump. An unknown number. She opened the message, her eyes widening as she read, "Stay away from him. Turn back, now." Celine's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the phone until her knuckles went white. "What does this mean?" she thought, pulse hammering in her ears. "Who's sending these? And how do they know I'm in this car right now?" She looked up at the driver's silhouette, then out at the darkening streets climbing higher into the hills. Someone was watching every move she made. The car pulled through iron gates and climbed until Alessandro's villa appeared, perched above Monaco, like an eagle's nest. Celine followed a butler through massive wooden doors and stopped, surprised. The entrance hall was Victorian, all dark. Wood paneling and antique furniture that belonged in another century. Not the modern luxury she'd expected. "Signor Moretti is waiting upstairs, Signorina." She climbed the marble staircase, and the second floor opened into something completely different. Sophisticated modern design with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Mediterranean. Paintings. Along the walls that made her heart skip. A long dining table positioned to face the view. Alessandro stood with his back to her, speaking rapid French into his phone. He turned, saw her, and ended the call mid-sentence. For several heartbeats he just looked at her, his gaze traveling down the red dress and back up, and then he crossed to pull out her chair. "You look beautiful," he said simply. She sat hyper-conscious of his nearness, and her eyes caught on the piano in the corner. "You play?" she heard herself ask. Alessandro settled across from her with fluid grace. "Sometimes. My mother's legacy, music was hers, business was my father's." Celine's breath caught in surprise. "Mine too. The piano you replaced was my mother's, the only thing I brought from Paris." Something passed between them, a recognition that made the air heavier. Celine opened her portfolio, desperate for professional ground. "I looked at your collection, and I think I know what pieces would complement." Alessandro raised his hand, eyebrow lifting with it, the scar cutting through it suddenly more prominent. "Business later. First, dinner and conversation." His gaze held hers with intensity that made her stomach clench. "I want to know you." Her voice came out smaller than intended. "Know me?" "Yes." He leaned back slightly. "Tell me about Celine Davenport." She laughed nervously, the words tumbling out. "You know my father, so you know most of it. Paris. Before Monaco. Art history at the Sorbonne, 6 months here then back to Paris, that's everything." Alessandro rose and crossed to the bar cart with controlled movements, then leaned down until his mouth was close to her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "You're nervous. You don't need to be. Just be yourself." He straightened and returned to his seat as if he hadn't just made her pulse race, raising his wine glass without looking away from her. Silence settled heavy between them. Celine cleared her throat, grasping for safer conversation. "You said you and my father are friends. Did you work together?" Alessandro's mouth curved without humor, in a manner of speaking. More silence, weighted with things unsaid. "How old are you, Alessandro?" she asked, trying to make it sound casual even though she was very aware of the age gap. He didn't even pretend to dodge the question. 41, he said, mouth tipping in the faintest challenge. "Does that scare you?" She held his gaze, still smiling. "Not the number," she said softly. "The way you wear it." His smile deepened. "Good," he murmured, "because I'm not getting any younger." Celine bit her lip hard. 41. And he looks like that. I didn't think men that age could be this fit, this hot, she thought, heat spreading across her cheeks. Alessandro's eyes tracked the gesture, something predatory flickering in his gaze like he knew exactly what she was thinking. "And you?" he asked quietly. "How old are you, Celine?" Celine met his gaze directly, lifting her chin slightly. 23 in 2 months. Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement of the 18 years between them, calculation of what that meant. The silence stretched, weighted with implications neither seemed willing to address, until Celine pulled out her phone with fingers that trembled slightly. "I got a message in the car on the way here, from an unknown number. Someone knows my schedule, knows I'm here tonight." Alessandro's expression darkened, his jaw tightening in a way that made the air feel suddenly colder. "Show me." She turned the screen toward him and he read the message. Stay away from him, turn back now, with eyes that went cold and dangerous before he controlled the reaction. "Let me have your phone tracked," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "I need to know who's behind this." Celine shook her head, pulling the phone back. "My father can handle it. You don't need to get involved." Alessandro leaned forward slightly, his gaze holding hers with intensity that made breathing difficult. "If you get another message like this, I want you to tell me immediately. Do you understand?" Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a new text, another unknown number. "This is my personal line. Use it if you need me, Alessandro." Celine stared at the message, then looked up at him with wide eyes. "How did you know my number?" Alessandro's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, amused and mysterious, and he said nothing. Just reached for his wineglass as if he hadn't just demonstrated exactly how much access he had to information he shouldn't. When the staff quietly cleared their plates, Celine looked out at the view, Monaco spreading below them in cascading lights. "The view is incredible." Alessandro rose from his chair with fluid grace and extended his hand. "Come with me." His hand found the small of her back with gentle but possessive pressure, guiding her through glass doors onto a terrace that jutted out over the hillside, the Mediterranean breeze carrying salt and night-blooming jasmine. Alessandro moved to the railing, his profile sharp against the glittering cityscape. "My family has lived in this house for 200 years. We're Italian by blood, but Monaco raised me." He gestured toward the sprawl of wealth below. "This place is different, Celine. Glamour and darkness living side by side. Wealth and crime so tangled you can't separate them. And the only language everyone speaks is money." He pointed to a villa across the hillside. "That house there? That's where I took my first punch at 13. His hand shifted. "And that lit-up building on the right. That's where I got shot for the first time at 18. Celine turned to stare at him, shock cutting through the romantic atmosphere. "Shot? You've been shot?" Alessandro nodded once, matter of fact. "A few times." Her fingers reached up almost without permission, hovering near the scar cutting through his eyebrow, and he didn't pull away, just watched her with those storm-blue eyes that saw too much. "And this scar?" Alessandro's expression softened, something almost boyish breaking through. "That one I got at 22, fighting over a girlfriend who definitely wasn't worth it." His fingers rose slowly, tracing along her jawline with a touch so light it barely registered as contact, and then his hand shifted, sliding down to her dress strap with deliberate slowness. "What are you doing?" Celine asked, her breath catching as he eased the red strap down over her shoulder. Alessandro's gaze dropped to the skin he'd just exposed, and his expression went very still, focused on something just below her collarbone, a thin white line barely 5 inches long that disappeared beneath the fabric of her dress. "How did you get this scar?" he asked quietly, his fingers hovering above the mark without touching. Celine's eyes widened, shock and confusion warring in her chest. "How did you even see that?" It's barely visible." Alessandro looked up, meeting her gaze with intensity that stole her breath. "I always see everything, Celine." She pulled the strap back up quickly, covering the scar, her heart hammering for reasons she couldn't quite name. "It was a car accident, when I was just a kid." Alessandro turned away, looking out at the city below, and silence stretched between them, heavy with things he wasn't saying. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and careful. "I was the one who pulled you from that car 14 years ago in Paris." He paused, letting that land. "I was the one who put you in the ambulance. That's how I know about the scar." Celine's breath stopped completely, the world tilting sideways as his words rearranged everything she thought she knew. "You?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. "But I don't remember." "You were injured and in shock," Alessandro said, still not looking at her. "You'd been taken, kidnapped from school by your father's driver, the man who was supposed to pick you up that day." He turned back to face her, his expression harder now, more controlled. "Your father came to my family for help, because involving the police would have put you in more danger. So we found you." Tears welled in Celine's eyes before she could stop them. 14 years of buried fear and fragmented memories, suddenly crashing back in pieces she'd spent years trying to forget. Alessandro stepped closer, his hand rising to brush against her hair with surprising gentleness. "You're a brave girl, Celine. Do you know how that car crashed?" He didn't wait for her answer. "You stabbed a pen into the driver's neck from the back seat. The man your father trusted to pick you up from school. The man who was actually working for a criminal organization, planning to use you for diplomatic blackmail." His voice dropped lower. "When I found the car, it had already crashed. I was the first one there." A tear escaped down Celine's cheek, and she couldn't stop it, couldn't control the emotion welling up from places she'd locked away. "I don't remember the details. I tried so hard not to remember." Her voice broke. She whispered almost to herself. "What happened to him? To the driver?" Alessandro pulled her into his arms, and Celine found herself pressed against his chest, feeling safer than she had any right to feel with a man she barely knew, a man her father had warned her about, a man who was dangerous in every way that mattered. His voice came quiet against her hair. "Don't worry about that. Everyone got what they deserved." Celine stood in his embrace, tears falling silently, as 14 years of questions suddenly had answers she'd never expected. As the man holding her became something more than attraction or danger, became the person who'd saved her life when she was 9 years old and terrified. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that this changed everything, that walking away from Alessandro Moretti had just become impossible, not just because of the desire she couldn't deny, but because of a debt she could never repay. Before she could think better of it, Celine rose onto her toes and kissed him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt to pull herself closer. The kiss lasted only a heartbeat, soft, questioning, before she pulled back to read his reaction. Alessandro's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek as he leaned in, and returned the kiss with careful restraint. But then he stopped himself, breaking away even though his breathing had changed. "Celine!" His voice came out rough. "Are you sure about this? Because I know there's something here between us, I feel it too, but you need to understand I'm not safe for you." She lifted her chin and met his eyes. "Then why'd you invite me here tonight? This wasn't about the paintings, and we both know it." "No." Alessandro's thumb traced along her lower lip, the touch so light it barely registered. "It wasn't." He paused, and for a moment the control slipped enough for her to see what was underneath. "I'm just a man, Celine, and sometimes even when I know what's right and what's wrong, I can't make myself stop wanting something I shouldn't have." "Then don't," she whispered, and this time when she reached for him she didn't hold back. Alessandro didn't pull away. His hand slid into her hair and he kissed her like he'd been holding himself back for hours, his other hand finding the curve of her waist and pulling her against him until there was no space left between them. What started careful turned urgent fast, heat building until Celine forgot where she was, forgot every warning her father had given her, forgot everything except the way Alessandro's mouth felt on hers and the way his hands gripped her like he couldn't bear to let go. Her phone rang, cutting through the moment like a blade. Celine broke away gasping, her pulse racing and her lips already missing his. "I need to—" She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. "I should check—" Her father's voice came through sharp and worried. "Celine, where are you?" "I'm sending the car." The words hit like cold water. She turned away from Alessandro, trying to get her breathing under control before she answered. "Dad, no, don't do that. I'm already heading back to the residence." She ended the call and found Alessandro watching her with an expression that managed to be both amused and concerned at the same time. He pulled her back into his arms, tucking her head under his chin. "Your father's worried. Can't really blame him for that." His voice dropped lower. "Let me drive you home." Celine shook her head against his chest. "Better if you don't. If he sees you, it'll only make things worse. I'll just grab a cab." Alessandro pulled back to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "I'm not putting you in a cab, Celine. I don't want to let you out of my sight." They sat together in the back seat, while Alessandro's driver navigated Monaco's curves in silence, the privacy screen raised between them and the front. Alessandro found her hand in the darkness and laced his fingers through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world, his thumb drawing circles on her palm that made it hard to think about anything else. Celine had never felt anything like this before. This pull that made logic and safety feel irrelevant, this need that made her chest ache when he was close and made breathing difficult when he wasn't. Everything had shifted tonight in ways she couldn't undo, even if she wanted to. All she wanted was to be back in his arms, and she didn't care what it cost her. The car slowed as they neared the diplomatic residence, reality closing in with every second. Alessandro lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like both a promise and goodbye. "Text me when you're inside." Celine nodded, not trusting her voice. She stepped out onto the street, and the car pulled away. And she stood there watching his taillights disappear around the corner, with her hand still warm from his touch, and her heart already missing him. Celine lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, her mind replaying the moment Alessandro had pulled her close and kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Heat spread through her body just thinking about it, the way his hands had felt in her hair, the way his mouth had moved against hers, the way every nerve ending had come alive under his touch. She'd never felt anything like that before, never wanted anyone the way she wanted him, and the intensity of it scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. She opened the message, and ice flooded her veins. "If you don't stay away from him, you have no idea what's coming for you." Celine's hands shook as she stared at the words, fear cutting through the warmth that had been pooling in her stomach just moments before. She didn't think, just opened her messages and forwarded the text to Alessandro with trembling fingers. Alessandro sat in the back seat of his car heading back toward the villa when his phone buzzed. He opened Celine's message, and his expression went dark, his jaw tightening as he read the threat that had just been sent to her. He hit a number on speed dial, his voice coming out cold and controlled when the line connected. "Elias, I need you to trace Celine Davenport's phone. I want to know who's been calling and texting her. And set up tracking. I need to know where she is at all times." He ended the call and stared out the window at Monaco's glittering streets passing by, his mind already running through scenarios and contingencies. He'd have to play this carefully. He didn't want to put Celine in more danger than she was already in, but there was no avoiding the fact that this road led straight to a confrontation with Richard Davenport eventually. And when that happened, everything would come out. The next morning, Celine found her father at the breakfast table, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her pause halfway to her chair. "I need you to stay close to home for a while," Richard said without preamble, setting down his coffee cup with controlled precision. "Gallery to the residence, residence to the gallery, nowhere else." Celine felt unease prickle down her spine as she sat across from him. "Dad, is something wrong?" Richard rose from his chair and crossed to her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head with a gentleness that felt weighted with things he wasn't saying. "No, sweetheart. I just don't want you out of my sight right now." He left the dining room before she could ask anything else, and Celine sat alone with her cooling coffee, wondering what had put that look in her father's eyes. Alessandro stood on the deck of his luxury motor yacht anchored in Monaco's harbour, the morning sun catching on the water as he watched the coastline with eyes that saw more than most people ever would. The captain approached from the helm, and Alessandro spoke without turning. "I'll be bringing a guest aboard. I need you to disable all the radar and tracking systems before we leave port, Riccardo." "We can't be followed." "Si, signore." Alessandro's phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he saw the name on the screen, his jaw tightened. "Gianni Lombardi," he answered on the third ring, keeping his voice neutral. "Gianni!" His cousin's voice came through sharp and impatient. "You need to convince Richard Davenport to cooperate, otherwise we're going to have to play our last card." There was a pause, weighted with threat. "I'm sending people to pick up the girl." Alessandro's hand tightened on the railing, his mind already racing through scenarios and contingencies. "Leave that to me," he said, his voice coming out calmer than he felt. "I've already got the girl." Silence on the other end, then Gianni's laugh, cold and satisfied. "Good, keep her close, cousin. We might need her sooner than we thought." The line went dead. Alessandro stood on the deck staring at Monaco spread before him like a jeweled trap, and for the first time in his life he understood what it meant to be caught between loyalty and something that felt dangerously close to love. He had Celine's trust now, had her attention, maybe even the beginning of her heart. And he was about to use all of it to keep her alive. Celine pressed her fingers to her temples, staring at the same Monet reproduction that had sat unsold on Galerie Aubert's wall for 3 months. Another thrilling Tuesday in paradise, she thought, right as the doorbell chimed. Alessandro Moretti walked in like he owned the place. 2 bodyguards blocked the door behind him. Celine's pulse kicked hard. Into the rim of her glass she breathed, "Why is he here?" Alessandro stopped at the counter, his stormy blue eyes fixed on hers. "I've come to get you." Celine gripped the edge of the counter, forcing her voice steady. "I can't, I'm working." Alessandro's mouth curved into that dangerous smile. He didn't even look away from her as he called out, "Madame Aubert?" Her boss materialized from the back office instantly. Madame's calculating gaze swept between them. "Monsieur Moretti, how wonderful to see you again." Alessandro never looked away from Celine. "Miss Davenport will be showing me some pieces this afternoon." "At my yacht." Madame's smile sharpened. "Of course." "Celine, get your things." Celine's cheeks burned. But Madame..." Her boss's voice stayed polite but firm. "Celine, now." The Bentley smelled like leather and danger. "You basically just kidnapped me," Celine said, pressing back against the door. Yet she couldn't stop letting her eyes drag over him, equal parts fury and unwilling admiration. "Seems that way," Alessandro said, his bitter smile not quite reaching his eyes. The marina appeared ahead. €1 million yachts lined the dock like toys. The car stopped at Port Hercules, Monaco's crown jewel of maritime excess. Super yachts lined the harbor like floating palaces, each one a monument to unimaginable wealth. Alessandro emerged first, then rounded the car to open her door himself, dismissing his men with a subtle gesture. Alessandro's hand found hers as they walked toward a sleek black yacht. His thumb brushed her knuckles. "Don't look so terrified." She placed her palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, inevitable. He drew up at a sleek black yacht, all blade and gloss. Diavolo 2 shimmered across the hull in silver. The gangway tipped into place. His hand found the small of her back, and they stepped aboard. The deck looked like a 5-star set piece. Champagne on ice, caviar tins gleaming, canapes laid out like art. Celine laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "So this is about paintings, huh?" Alessandro moved behind her, his presence a wall of heat at her back. His lips brushed her cheek, barely there, electric. "Today you're mine, Celine." The engines roared to life beneath their feet. Celine watched Monaco shrink in the distance, her champagne flute trembling. "What have I gotten myself into?" she thought, following the white wake the yacht carved across the water. She faced him, eyes bright, a playful tilt to her lips. "What is this really about, Alessandro?" Alessandro's expression darkened as his hand slid to her waist, drawing her a breath closer. "You'll know soon enough." The yacht picked up speed, heading toward open water, toward whatever Alessandro had planned, and Celine knew, with a shiver she couldn't name, that this trip might start something. Danger and desire braided so tightly, She couldn't tell which excited her more. They sat on the aft deck as the yacht cut through the Mediterranean, Monaco now just a distant shimmer on the horizon, and silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Alessandro poured champagne with controlled movements, but Celine noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't watching. "You're not going to tell me what's really happening, are you?" she asked quietly. He handed her the glass, his fingers brushing hers in a way that felt deliberate. "Not yet." Celine tipped her head, an incredulous, surprised smile touching her mouth as her brows lifted. "Why not?" Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the endless blue ahead. That night 14 years ago, it was the first time I'd ever actually saved someone instead of destroying or controlling. He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. A 9-year-old girl looked at me like I was a hero, and something in me changed. I started questioning what kind of man I wanted to be. Celine's breath caught, her hand rising to touch his face without thinking. "Maybe that's what connects us. Not just coincidence, but something deeper." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "From the moment I saw you in that lobby, I haven't been able to think about anything else. You make me feel scared and safe at the same time. Is that even possible?" Alessandro's hand covered hers, pressing it against his cheek with surprising gentleness. "With you, everything feels possible." His thumb traced along her jaw. "You terrify me because you make me want to be the man you think I am, and I'm not sure I know how." Her heart hammered as her fingers trembled, moving to trace his lips with hesitant touch. "Then maybe we're both terrified." Alessandro's control shattered. His hand slid into her hair and he pulled her to him, kissing her with a passion that made thinking impossible, his other hand gripping her waist as he drew her closer across the small space between them. What started as her tentative touch became something consuming, heat building until Celine forgot where they were. Forgot everything except his mouth on hers, and the way his hands held her like she was something precious and necessary all at once. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Alessandro's forehead pressed against hers, his breathing as ragged as her own. "Stay with me tonight, just tonight. Let me have you in my world." Celine's hands trembled where they gripped his shirt, fear and desire tangling until she couldn't separate one from the other. "But my father—" "I'll handle him," Alessandro said, his thumb brushing across her swollen lips. "Please, Celine." His phone rang, sharp and insistent, shattering the moment like breaking glass. Alessandro's expression went dark as he glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening in a way that made something cold settle in her stomach. He declined without hesitation and tossed the phone onto the table, his attention returning to her like nothing else existed. Where were we? But Celine had seen his face, had seen something cold and dangerous flicker through his eyes before he'd controlled it, had seen the name on the screen for just a second, Gianni. "Who was that?" she asked quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. Alessandro's hand found hers, lacing their fingers together with possessive certainty. "Someone who doesn't matter right now." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The only person who matters is you." It should have reassured her. Instead, it made her wonder what he wasn't telling her, and whether trusting him with her heart also meant trusting him with her life. Alessandro stood, his hand trailing down her arm. "Give me 5 minutes, I need to change and make a call." He disappeared into the yacht's interior, leaving Celine alone on the deck with champagne and the endless Mediterranean stretching in every direction. She sat in the silence, the yacht's engines a low hum beneath her feet, and something nagged at the edges of her mind. For a vessel this size, this expensive, there should be staff, stewards, deckhands, someone serving drinks and clearing plates. But she'd seen no one except the captain at the helm when they'd boarded, and even he'd disappeared once they'd left port. The yacht felt too empty, too quiet. Unease prickled down her spine. Celine rose and moved toward the interior, her heels silent on the polished deck. The main cabin was elegant, all dark wood and soft lighting, but still deserted. She moved down a corridor lined with closed doors, following the sound of movement from somewhere ahead. A door stood ajar at the end of the hall, and through it she could see Alessandro with his back to her, shirtless, reaching for a fresh shirt from what looked like a walk-in closet. She stopped in the doorway, breath catching. His back was a map of lean muscle and control, shoulders moving with fluid grace, and she couldn't look away. Couldn't stop her eyes from tracing the lines of his body with a hunger that should have embarrassed her, but didn't. Alessandro turned and caught her staring. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air between them charged with everything unspoken. Celine didn't say anything, didn't trust her voice, just crossed the space between them with steps that felt braver than she actually felt. Alessandro's hands found her waist immediately, pulling her against him with a hunger that made her knees weak. He whispered to her ear, "Celine." She silenced him with her mouth, and whatever hesitation had been holding him back dissolved as his hands slid up her back, finding the zipper of her dress. They moved toward the bed in a tangle of desperate touches and breathless kisses, Alessandro lowering her onto the soft sheets with a control that was rapidly fraying at the edges. His mouth traveled down her neck, his hands exploring with a reverence that made her arch into his touch, and Celine forgot every warning her father had given her, forgot everything except the way Alessandro made her feel, wanted, desired, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. But then Alessandro stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers as he fought for control. "We have to stop." Celine's hands fisted in his hair, her body still humming with need. "I don't want to stop." "I have to," Alessandro said, his voice strained, and he pulled away completely, sitting up on the edge of the bed with his back to her. "God, Celine, I'm barely holding on here, and I need to—" "You don't want me," she whispered, hurt cutting through the desire. Alessandro turned to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes stole her breath, raw want mixed with something that looked like pain. "No, I'm trying very hard not to want you as much as I do right now, because if I don't stop, I won't be able to." He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "Listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is important." Celine's pulse kicked up for entirely different reasons now, unease creeping back in. "I called your father 15 minutes ago and told him you're with me." Her eyes widened, shock cutting through everything else. "You did what? Why would you do that?" Alessandro's arms tightened around her, his voice dropping to something harder, more serious. "Because I had to. Because right now, Celine, I'm taking you away from Monaco." He paused, letting that land. "You're in danger." Celine's body went rigid in his arms, every muscle tensing as his words registered. "Danger? What are you talking about?" She tried to pull away, to put distance between them, but Alessandro's arms tightened around her, holding her against his chest with gentle but absolute restraint. "Let me go." "No." His voice came quiet but firm against her ear. "Listen to me first, then decide if you want to run." Celine's heart hammered, panic and confusion warring with the warmth of his body still pressed against hers, with the way his hands held her like she was something precious he couldn't bear to release. "So you called my father, you told him I'm with you." "I had to." Alessandro's arms remained locked around her, one hand splayed across her stomach, the other across her ribs, keeping her anchored to him. "Because the people who want information from your father, the people who want to hurt you to get it, they're my family, Celine." The words landed like ice water, shock cutting through everything else. She tried again to pull away, to turn and face him, but he held her still, his mouth close to her ear. "But I will never let that happen," he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intense. "I will never let them touch you." "What did you tell my father?" Her voice came out shakier than she wanted, fear bleeding through despite her attempt at control. "That I'm protecting you. That I have a plan." His lips brushed against her temple, soft and reassuring even as his arms remained steel bands around her. "That he needs to trust me." Celine's thoughts raced, trying to piece together what he was telling her through the haze of shock. "What about my father? Are they going to hurt him? And you—" Her voice cracked. "Who's going to protect you from your own family?" Alessandro shifted behind her, pulling her back more firmly against his chest, and pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck, tender despite the tension radiating through his body. "I have a plan, Celine." Another kiss, this one lingering at her pulse point. "But I need you to be part of it willingly." He paused, his breath warm against her skin. "And if you won't, I'll still do what I have to do to keep you safe." Celine finally managed to turn in his arms, meeting his eyes with confusion, and dawning understanding mixing in equal measure. "You're saying I don't have a choice." "You have a choice." Alessandro's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Trust me and let me protect you, or fight me while I protect you anyway." His eyes held hers with devastating honesty. "But either way, Celine, you're not going back to Monaco until this is over." Tears spilled down Celine's cheeks before she could stop them, hot and unbidden, her voice breaking on the words. "So, all of it was a lie? Everything you said, everything you made me feel?" Alessandro turned her in his arms, forcing her to face him, and Celine trembled, caught between the reality of her nakedness in his embrace and the devastating realization that the man she'd fallen for was holding her captive. His hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing away tears with surprising gentleness, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Does this feel like I don't feel anything for you?" Her lips trembled, words dying before they could form. Alessandro kissed her, deep, desperate, consuming, pouring everything he couldn't say into the press of his mouth against hers until she forgot how to think, forgot everything except the way he made her feel even now, even knowing what he was. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers, and Celine forced the question past the tightness in her throat. "What do they want from my father?" Alessandro's jaw tightened, his hand still cradling her face. "Information that keeps the Lombardi and Moretti families standing. Details you don't need to know." His thumb traced her cheekbone with aching slowness. "But I won't let them use you as leverage to get it. That's all you need to understand." Panic clawed up Celine's throat, her breath coming faster as the implications crashed over her. "If I'm not the leverage, then how will they get what they want from him?" Alessandro's silence was answer enough, and her eyes widened with dawning horror, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "They're going to hurt him, aren't they?" Alessandro pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her shaking body, his voice dropping to something calmer, more controlled. "I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen. I need you to calm down and trust me." He paused, his breath warm against her temple. "But there will be sacrifices, things you're better off not knowing." Celine's entire body trembled with fear she couldn't control, her voice coming out sharper than intended. "Where are you taking?" "Me?" Alessandro smoothed her hair back from her face, his touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. "There's an island off the coast, Corsica. I have a secret small villa there, completely off the grid. No one will find you." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, searching his face for answers he wasn't giving. "And the plan? What's the plan, Alessandro?" He leaned close until his mouth was against her ear, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You're going to marry me." Celine's breath stopped completely, shock rendering her motionless, and when she finally found her voice, it came out strangled. "What?" Alessandro pulled back to meet her eyes, his expression serious, controlled, absolute, one hand sliding to the back of her neck to hold her gaze to his. "If you become mine, officially, legally mine, then you become family." His grip tightened fractionally, and no one touches family without starting a war they can't win. The car wound through Corsica's coastal roads as dawn broke over the Mediterranean, painting everything gold and pink, but Celine saw none of it, just stared out the window with tear-swollen eyes, her mind a chaos of fear and disbelief. Alessandro's hand found hers on the seat between them, his fingers lacing through hers with gentle insistence. She didn't pull away, didn't respond, just let her hand lie limp in his. His phone rang, the screen lighting up with a name that made Celine's stomach clench. Gianni. "Is that him?" Her voice came out flat, emotionless. The one who wants to hurt my father? Who wants to hurt me? Alessandro declined the call and tucked the phone away, his grip on her hand tightening. No one is going to hurt you. Celine finally turned to look at him, anger cutting through the numbness. Where are we going? The villa. Alessandro met her eyes, his expression unreadable. We have something urgent to take care of first. Then we'll go home. The car stopped in front of a municipal building, pale stone and morning light, and Alessandro came around to open her door, offering his hand. Celine stared at the building's entrance, at the official seal above the door, and understanding crashed over her like cold water. We're doing it now? Right now. Alessandro's voice came quiet, but firm as he helped her from the car. It needs to be immediate. She pulled back slightly, panic rising. But my documents, my passport, I have everything. His hand found the small of her back, guiding her forward. It's all arranged. The ceremony took 15 minutes, a sparse office, an official who asked no questions, papers signed with hands that shook, and then they were walking back into the sunlight as husband and wife. Celine jerked her hand away when Alessandro reached for it, her voice sharp with hurt she couldn't control. This is just a formality, just paperwork to keep me safe. Tears burned behind her eyes. I always wanted to marry for love. This means nothing to me. Alessandro caught her wrist, stopping her in the middle of the street, and pulled her back to face him. I'm sorry it had to be this way. His other hand rose to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. But even if circumstances were different, having you as my wife would still be the best thing that's ever happened to me. Don't forget that. The villa sat on a gentle slope overlooking the sea, modest compared to Alessandro's Monaco estate, all white stone and terracotta, with a small pool catching the afternoon light. Inside, everything was cream and camel tones, simple elegance, and a breeze from the open window stirred Celine's hair as she stood in the middle of the living room, feeling displaced from her own life. I need to talk to my father, she said, without looking at Alessandro. His voice came from behind her, careful and controlled. I need to arrange some things first, make sure the lines are secure. Then you can speak to him. Celine turned to face him, exhaustion and fear and anger all tangled together. When? Soon. Alessandro moved closer, his expression softening fractionally. I promise. Alessandro reached for his phone when Celine's hand shot out and caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. No. Her voice came steady despite the fear still swimming in her eyes. You talk to me first. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Celine? Don't. She pulled the phone from his hand and set it on the table between them. If I'm really your wife now, if my last name is legally Moretti, then I'm part of this whether you want me to be or not. Which means I need to know everything. No more protecting me from information I have a right to know. Alessandro studied her for a long moment. And something shifted in his expression, recognition that the woman in front of him wasn't the terrified girl from an hour ago. All right, sit down. My cousin Gianni runs the Lombardi organization. Alessandro began, pacing the villa's living room. The Morettis have worked with them for 5 generations. 6 months ago, the European Union opened an investigation into organized crime finances. They're preparing to freeze billions in assets, bank accounts, properties, shell companies. He turned to face her. Your father, through his diplomatic work, has access to the union's classified list. That information would give Gianni time to move money before the freeze happens. Celine's stomach clenched. And when my father refused, Gianni ordered me to use you as leverage. Alessandro's voice came flat, factual. Get close to you, take you, force your father's cooperation through threat of harm. So yesterday, the yacht, everything you said... Celine's voice cracked, despite her attempt at control. Was supposed to be part of the plan, yes. Alessandro crossed to her, sitting on the coffee table so they were eye level. But from the moment I got you on that boat, everything changed. I called your father, told him you were safe, told him I was protecting you instead of using you. We've been working together since yesterday, since I made the choice to betray Gianni's orders. Celine searched his face. Why should I believe you? Because if I was still following Gianni's plan, you'd be in a very different situation right now. Alessandro's hand rose to cup her face. And because I'm about to let you talk to your father so he can confirm everything I just told you. After Richard confirmed the timeline and his trust in Alessandro's protection, after Celine had cried against her father's voice coming through the encrypted line, she stood in the villa's living room, trying to process everything. So what happens now? She asked. Gianni's expecting that list. What are you going to give him? Alessandro ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his control. That's what I've been trying to figure out. I can't give him fake information. He'll verify it. I can't give him nothing. He'll come after you. Celine paced to the window, her mind working through the problem despite her fear. What about art? Converting assets to art. Alessandro turned to look at her. Art came to mind, but it's too slow. You buy a Picasso, you wait months or years to sell it properly. Gianni needs liquidity in weeks, not years. What if you didn't have to sell it? Celine turned back to face him, energy building in her voice. There was a collector at the gallery. Used his art as collateral for loans. Art-backed loans. Got 80% of value in cash immediately. Alessandro straightened, his full attention locking on her now. Immediate liquidity. Private banks do it all the time. You buy a piece for 10 million, next day you get 8 million in cash using it as collateral. Legal, fast, and the EU can't touch it. But even with loans we'd need ongoing cash flow, gallery rental programs. Celine was thinking faster now. Open a private gallery, lease pieces to collectors. They pay 10 to 15% annually. You keep ownership. They get prestige, you get steady legal income. Alessandro stared at her and something shifted in his expression, genuine admiration mixed with something deeper. You just solved weeks of problems in 2 minutes. He crossed to her and kissed her, not desperate but grateful, and when he pulled back, his eyes held hers with intensity that made breathing difficult. I need to call Gianni now. Gianni Lombardi answered sharp and impatient. Where the hell have you been? Alessandro's voice went cold and controlled. All business now. I have the list, and I have the girl. Silence on the other end, then Gianni's voice came careful, calculating. You got it? Davenport gave it up. I have what we need, Alessandro replied, his tone giving nothing away as his eyes found Celine's across the room. But this needs to be presented properly, to the council in person. 2 days, Sicily. Villa in Taormina. Why can't you just... Gianni started, irritation bleeding through. Because this is bigger than a phone call, Gianni. Alessandro's voice hardened with authority. 2 days. I'll bring everything. Documentation, the girl, the solution. You want this done right, we do it face to face. More silence as Gianni calculated his options. Finally, fine, 2 days. And Alessandro, the girl better be under control. She is, Alessandro said flatly, ending the call before Gianni could push further. Tension radiated from his shoulders as he set the phone down. You didn't tell him the plan, Celine said quietly, watching him carefully. No. Alessandro turned to face her, his expression serious. Gianni thinks I have the list from your father. He thinks you're my prisoner. When we get to Sicily, you'll help me present the art strategy to the council. That's when they'll learn the real plan. His jaw tightened. And that's when they'll learn you're my wife, not my hostage. Celine's stomach clenched with nerves she couldn't quite control. He's going to be angry. He's going to be furious, Alessandro confirmed, crossing to her and cupping her face with both hands. Which is why you stay next to me at all times. You don't speak unless I tell you to. You don't look at anyone I haven't introduced. And if anything feels wrong, you get behind me immediately. I understand, she whispered, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. 2 days, and then we walk into the lion's den together. The night before Sicily, Celine stood on the villa's terrace watching the Mediterranean stretch endlessly under moonlight, her mind too restless for sleep. She heard Alessandro's footsteps before she felt his arms slide around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest with gentle possession. Celine, he murmured against the curve of her neck, his lips brushing her skin as he spoke. I know you're still angry with me, still processing everything that's happened. I had to handle things the way I did to keep you safe. His arms tightened fractionally. But you, even 14 years ago when you were just a terrified little girl, I saw that fighting spirit in you. You've never stopped having it, that fire under all the softness. It's what draws me to you in ways I can't resist. Celine turned in his arms to face him, her eyes searching his in the moonlight, and Alessandro's hand rose to cup her face with aching tenderness. All of this, the danger, the complications, it'll be over in a few days, he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. And you'll be free. You're so young, you have your whole life ahead of you. So many things you should experience. He paused, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. But I need you to know something. When this is over, the only thing I want is for you to stay as my wife for real this time. I don't want to lose you, Celine. His eyes held hers with devastating honesty. But whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Celine's fingers rose slowly to trace along his jaw, following the line up to the scar cutting through his eyebrow, that mark of violence that somehow made him more real, more human. She said nothing, just let her touch linger for a heartbeat longer before pulling away and walking back inside without a word. Alessandro stood alone on the terrace, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the dark water. He'd faced violence, betrayal, death threats, had lived his entire life navigating danger without flinching. But standing there in the quiet night, Alessandro felt something he'd never experienced before, a tightness in his chest that made breathing difficult, an ache in his heart that had nothing to do with physical pain and everything to do with the terrifying possibility of losing the one thing he'd never expected to find: love. The private jet touched down in Palermo under late afternoon sun, and the second Celine's feet hit the tarmac she felt it, that sick twist in her gut that told her they were walking into something dangerous. A black Mercedes sat waiting on the runway, engine running, and Alessandro caught her hand before they reached it, pulling her around to face him. "Remember what we talked about." His voice came quiet but absolute. "Stay close, keep your hand in mine. Don't say a word until I tell you it's safe." His fingers tightened around hers. "Trust me, as long as I'm next to you, nobody touches you." "Got it?" His thumb brushed her knuckles once. "You're my wife now. They'll treat you the way they treat me." Celine managed a nod, her throat too tight for words. The Mercedes pulled away from the airport with them in the back seat, Alessandro's hand still wrapped around hers, like he had no intention of letting go. And Celine stared at their joined fingers, trying to make sense of everything spinning through her head. 2 weeks ago she'd been a curator worried about gallery shows and her father's warnings. Now, she was sitting in a car heading toward a meeting with the kind of men her father had spent years trying to protect her from. Married to someone she'd known for 14 days. And somehow, impossibly, the scariest part wasn't the danger. It was how badly she wanted to stay when this was over. Alessandro had taken her, lied to her, forced her into marriage to keep her safe, and she should hate him for all of it. Should be planning her escape the second they got clear of this mess. Instead, she kept thinking about his hands in her hair, his voice saying he didn't want to lose her, the way he looked at her like she was worth burning his whole world down for. Walking away was going to destroy her, and the worst part? She wasn't sure she wanted to walk away at all. The car wound up a hillside road lined with cypress trees, and as they rounded the final curve, a villa appeared that looked more like a castle. Ancient stone walls rising against the Sicilian sky, terraced gardens cascading down the hillside, hand-armed men stationed at every visible entrance. Alessandro's hand tightened around Celine's as the Mercedes pulled through iron gates that had probably stood for centuries. "Ready?" His voice came quiet, meant only for her. Celine's heart hammered, but she lifted her chin. "No, but let's do it anyway." Something flickered across Alessandro's expression, pride mixed with concern, and he brought her hand to his lips briefly, before the car stopped. The moment they stepped out, Alessandro's eyes found hers, and whatever he saw there made him pause. Celine stood in her white dress, with her light brown hair catching the late afternoon light. and those green eyes that had stopped him cold 2 weeks ago, now filled with a courage that stole his breath all over again. She was terrified. He could feel it in the way her fingers trembled in his, but she was facing it head-on anyway. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. Armed guards flanked the entrance, each one nodding respectfully as Alessandro approached. "Signor Moretti." But their eyes tracked immediately to Celine with undisguised curiosity. This woman Alessandro Moretti had brought into the heart of family business, this stranger holding his hand like she belonged there. They climbed stone stairs to the villa's main floor, Alessandro's hand never leaving hers, and when they entered the great hall, Celine's breath caught despite herself. 20 men, maybe more, filled the space, some standing in clusters talking in low voices, the others seated around a massive table that dominated the center of the room. Lombardis and Morettis mixed together in expensive suits that didn't quite hide the violence beneath. 2 men broke away immediately when they spotted Alessandro, pulling him into embraces that spoke of genuine affection. "Alessandro, Christ, how long has it been since we saw you here?" The older of the 2 clapped him on the shoulder. Then his eyes dropped to Celine with open interest. Every conversation in the room had died. Every eye had turned to stare at the woman standing beside Alessandro Moretti, with her hand clasped in his. At the head of the long table, Gianni Lombardi sat watching them, with eyes gone cold and calculating. He was late 40s, handsome in a brutal sort of way, and the arrogance in his expression made Celine's stomach clench with instinctive wariness. "Alessandro," Gianni's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you bring a woman here?" He stood slowly, his gaze moving from Celine's face down to their joined hands and back up again, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Is that Celine Davenport?" His head tilted slightly, predatory. "What game are you playing, cousin?" Alessandro stood perfectly still, his posture radiating control, but Celine felt his grip on her hand tighten protectively. "I'd like to introduce everyone to my wife," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Celine Moretti." The room erupted, voices rising in shock and confusion. But Gianni's reaction cut through everything else. He moved toward them with fury radiating from every line of his body, and Celine's breath stopped in her throat as this dangerous man closed the distance between them. An older man stepped into Gianni's path, one hand raised in a gesture that commanded immediate attention. "If Alessandro brought her here like this, he has an explanation." His voice carried absolute authority despite his age. "Let him speak." Alessandro's shoulders relaxed fractionally as he inclined his head with clear respect. "Uncle." The old man nodded once, then gestured for Alessandro to continue. "I solved our problem," Alessandro said, his voice steady and controlled as his eyes swept the room. "But the most important part, my wife solved it. Where's the list, Alessandro?" Gianni's voice came harsh with barely controlled rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And why the hell did you marry this girl? You think a piece of paper protects her from me?" Alessandro's expression went cold as stone, and when he spoke, his voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "She's a Moretti now, Gianni. You can't touch her, not without going through me first." The Moretti men in the room shifted immediately, moving subtly to position themselves closer to Alessandro, and the air went electric with threat. Gianni's face flushed dark with anger. "You think enough?" The old man's voice cracked like a whip. "Everyone will sit down and listen." His eyes found Celine, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "To Celine Moretti." Alessandro's hand squeezed hers once, reassurance and encouragement wrapped together, and when Celine looked up at him, he gave her the smallest nod. Time to show them what she was made of. Celine straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice came out strong and steady. No shake, no hesitation. "I'm Celine Moretti." Her eyes swept the room, meeting the skeptical stares head-on. "Everyone needs to listen up, because this plan doesn't just protect your money, but it makes you more." When she finished, the room went dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just looked at each other, processing, and Celine's heart hammered even though her face stayed calm. Alessandro's head dipped. And she caught the smile he was trying to hide, pride mixed with something deeper, that made her chest feel tight in a good way. Enzo Moretti pushed himself up from his chair and crossed to where she stood. He held out his hand, his lined face shifting into something almost warm. "Welcome to the family, Celine Moretti." His grip was surprisingly strong. His eyes cut to Alessandro. "My nephew made a smart choice. Entertaining one, too." Gianni stood at the window with his back to everyone, shoulders tight, not saying a word. Around them, voices started picking up. Not angry, just excited, like men who'd just spotted an angle they'd missed. "It's completely legal. Nothing the EU can freeze. This actually works!" Alessandro's voice cut clean through the noise. "Gianni." Every head turned toward the man at the window. "As head of the Lombardi family, we need your sign-off." Alessandro's tone stayed level, controlled. "Give us your answer and let me walk out of here." "With my wife." Gianni turned slow, and Celine's hand squeezed Alessandro's involuntarily, as this dangerous man crossed the room toward them with deliberate steps. He stopped right in front of Alessandro, eyes hard. "You went—" "Against my orders." Alessandro stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his voice dropping low. "I didn't go against you. I grabbed the girl, fell for her, married her, and fixed our problem. In that order." Gianni stared at him for what felt like forever, and Celine couldn't breathe while these two men sized each other up with years of family shit hanging between them. Then Gianni's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close, and he pulled Alessandro into one of those rough embraces that looked like it might turn into a fight, but didn't. "Then congrats. Cousin," Gianni's voice carried across the room, "on the marriage and the solution." When they broke apart, Alessandro nodded to the room. "With your permission, I'm taking my wife on our honeymoon." His hand tightened around Celine's. "I sent the implementation plan to everyone's phones. We start tomorrow." He turned. Celine's hand locked in his, and they walked toward the exit at a pace that looked casual but felt like barely controlled escape. Voices rose behind them as they hit the stairs, arguments, questions, excited planning. But Alessandro kept moving, kept holding her hand, kept putting distance between them and that room full of dangerous men. They didn't speak until the Mercedes pulled away from the villa, and even then Alessandro just brought her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles like she'd just saved his life. "You were incredible," he said against her skin. Celine let out a shaky breath, adrenaline finally catching up, and leaned into him when his arm came around her shoulders. They'd walked into the lion's den, and somehow they'd walked back out alive. The Mercedes pulled up to the diplomatic residence in Monaco 3 hours after they'd left Sicily, and Richard Davenport stood waiting at the entrance like he'd been watching for their arrival. The second Celine stepped out of the car, she broke into a run, and Richard caught her in his arms, with the kind of desperate relief only a parent who'd thought they might lose their child could understand. "Dad!" Her voice broke against his shoulder. "You're safe." Richard's arms tightened around her. "Thank God you're safe." When they finally pulled apart, Richard turned to Alessandro and extended his hand, his grip firm despite the conflict clear in his expression. "Thank you for protecting her, and for—" he paused, jaw working. "For saving her again." Alessandro inclined his head respectfully as he accepted the handshake. "Sir." Richard's hand dropped, and his face hardened into something that looked more like the diplomat Celine knew, controlled, strategic, already calculating his next move. "But now I need to ask you to stay away from us. From her. Permanently." Celine's throat went tight, her eyes darting between her father and Alessandro, and she felt Alessandro's jaw clench, even though he didn't move. "Richard," Alessandro said quietly, his voice carrying weight despite the calm delivery. "That's not really possible, because Celine and I are married." Richard's expression went blank with shock. "You did what?" "Dad—" Celine stepped forward, her hand finding Alessandro's. "It was necessary, part of the plan to keep us both safe." "Then get it annulled." Richard's voice came sharp, brooking no argument. "Immediately." Alessandro cleared his throat, and something in the sound made both of them look at him. That's not possible either, not yet. For her safety, for the appearance that keeps threats away, Celine needs to stay my wife. At least for now. He paused, his hand tightening around Celine's. She's part of the family now. Leaving isn't as simple as signing papers. But when the time comes, his voice roughened slightly, if she wants a divorce, she can have one. Richard's face flushed with anger barely held in check. How dare you put my daughter in this position, Alessandro? Trap her in a marriage she didn't choose. Dad. Celine cut him off, her voice firm in a way that made both men stop and look at her. I love him. The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Richard stared at her like she'd just announced she was moving to Mars. Celine, you saw his world. You were kidnapped, forced into marriage. This man is dangerous. You can't possibly think I'm going to stand by and let... I'm not asking for permission, Celine said, and her voice stayed steady, even though her heart was racing. I'm making a choice. She took a breath, meeting her father's eyes directly. You're dangerous too, Dad. You've spent my whole life trying to protect me because your work makes you a target. I've lived with threats and security, and the knowledge that people might use me to get to you. Her hand squeezed Alessandro's. I'm safe with Alessandro, and I want to be with him. Richard swallowed hard, pain flickering across his face before he controlled it. What do I need to do to stop you? Celine pulled away from Alessandro and crossed to her father, wrapping her arms around him with the same desperate affection she'd had as a little girl. Just trust me, Dad. Let me make my own mistakes if that's what this is. When she stepped back, she reached for Alessandro's hand again, lacing their fingers together with deliberate certainty. Richard looked at their joined hands, then up at his daughter's face, and something in his expression cracked. Are you leaving with him? Right now? Celine smiled, turning to look at Alessandro with something soft and real in her eyes that made his breath catch. No, Dad. First he has to propose to me properly. Then he has to ask you for my hand. And then we need to have an actual wedding. Her smile widened. After all that, then I'll leave with him. Alessandro stared at her and something lit up behind his eyes. Surprise mixed with hope, mixed with the kind of happiness he'd forgotten he could feel. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then be ready at 8 tonight. I'm taking you to dinner. Richard made a sound somewhere between frustration and resignation, but when Celine looked back at him, she saw the smallest hint of acceptance beginning to break through the anger. 8 o'clock, Alessandro repeated, his eyes never leaving Celine's face. And wear something beautiful, because I'm going to do this right. The restaurant sat on Monaco's cliffside, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mediterranean at sunset, and Alessandro couldn't take his eyes off Celine. She wore champagne silk with a deep slit that caught the light every time she moved. Her dark hair swept up to show her neck, and when she crossed her legs with easy confidence and lifted her champagne glass, Alessandro forgot what he'd been about to say. Alessandro. Celine's eyes sparkled with sudden curiosity. I just thought of something. Who was sending me those threatening messages? A small smile tugged at Alessandro's mouth as he set down his own glass. The number was from a burner phone, Celine, but when we traced it properly, it came from inside the diplomatic residence. Her eyes went wide. My father sent them? Alessandro shrugged, the gesture casual. Or someone on his security team. Makes sense they'd want to keep you away from me. I can't believe, Celine started, but Alessandro reached across the table and caught her hand. Let's leave all that behind us, he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. We're starting something new now, a real life together. And making you happy is going to be the most important thing I do, Celine. He stood, and before she could ask what he was doing, Alessandro dropped to one knee beside the table. The restaurant went quiet around them, other diners noticing, whispers starting, but Alessandro only saw Celine's face as he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Will you marry me? His voice came steady despite the way his heart was hammering. For real this time. Not because we have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Celine's smile broke across her face like sunrise, and she leaned down to kiss him before he could open the box. Yes. Alessandro stood and pulled her into his arms, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. "We'll do this however you want, whatever pace you need, whatever you're comfortable with. Just tell me what you want from me." Celine rose on her toes, her mouth close to his ear, and whispered something that made Alessandro pull back to look at her with surprise, mixing with heat in his eyes. "There's nothing more attractive than a woman who knows what she wants," he said, his voice rough with desire and admiration tangled together. He took her hand, and they left the restaurant without waiting for the check, and the drive back to his villa passed in charged silence, hands clasped, eyes meeting, anticipation building with every passing second. When they reached the entrance, Alessandro lifted Celine into his arms and carried her up the stairs, and she laughed against his neck at the old-fashioned gesture that somehow felt exactly right. He set her down in his bedroom, the lights of Monaco spreading below them through the windows, and when he reached for the buttons of his shirt, Celine watched him with eyes that held desire and trust in equal measure. "You're mine now, Celine," Alessandro said quietly as he moved toward her, his hands finding her waist, his forehead resting against hers. "If you'll have me." "I already said yes," she whispered back and pulled him down to her. Paris in autumn looked like a postcard. Golden leaves drifting down the Marais streets, the kind of crisp air that made everything feel possible. Celine stood in the doorway of Gallery Moretti, watching afternoon light paint her collection, and for the first time in her life, everything felt normal. No threats, no kidnappings, no councils deciding her fate. Just her gallery, her art, and the life she'd chosen. Alessandro had stepped back from the family business entirely, and they'd built something beautifully ordinary in Paris, an apartment in the 4th arrondissement, Sunday mornings at the bakery, dinners with friends who had no idea about Alessandro's past. The gallery had been featured in Vogue Paris last month, Celine's curation making waves in the art world on her own merit. Critics were calling her eye for emerging artists exceptional, and she'd done it herself. That mattered more than anything. It was perfect, well, mostly perfect. "Signora Moretti." Marco stood in front of a Rothko with a notebook, scribbling furiously. The way he uses color to create emotional depth, see how the red vibrates against the orange? Intentional anxiety made visible. Celine blinked, surprised by the sophisticated analysis. "That's actually very good." "You taught me well," Marco said with a smile, "though I still prefer the Kandinsky. Speaks to the soul." Across the gallery, Luca was closing a sale with the confidence of a seasoned dealer. The brushwork is derivative of the Vienna Secession, but the matte finish subverts traditional gilt. Commentary on how we value art, yes? The customer nodded enthusiastically. "I'll take it." That's when Alessandro walked in, and the look on his face said he'd witnessed this surreal scene through the window. He found Pietro near the entrance reading Understanding Modern Art, completely absorbed. "Pietro," Alessandro's voice came out strangled, like a man watching his careful plans unravel. "What are you doing?" Pietro looked up with the enthusiasm of a new convert. "Impressionism chapter, signore. Monet painted the same haystack 50 times. You're supposed to be working." Alessandro gestured vaguely at the door. "I am working," Pietro said, looking genuinely confused by the objection. "But Signora Moretti says if we're here 8 hours a day, we should understand what we're looking at." "My security team has become art critics," Alessandro said flatly, watching Marco take another photo of the Rothko. Celine appeared at his elbow, barely containing her laughter. "They're here all day, amore. What did you expect? I gave them tours and they got interested. Very interested," she added, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Luca's taking night classes at the Sorbonne, and Marco cried in front of the Dega last week. I hired trained professionals," Alessandro muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You've turned them into museum docents." "Cultured museum docents," Celine corrected with a grin. "Also, Marco sold 3 paintings last month. Better numbers than me." They both started laughing, helpless, ridiculous laughter at the absurdity of watching deadly serious bodyguards transformed into passionate art enthusiasts. "You know what the most dangerous part of our life is now?" Alessandro asked when he could breathe again, pulling her close. "What's that?" Celine looked up at him with eyes still bright from laughing. "Listening to Pietro's opinions on postmodernism," he said, his mouth quirking. "He has so many thoughts." "Welcome to normal life, Mr. Moretti," Celine said, rising on her toes to kiss him, "where the biggest threat is pretentious art discussion." Alessandro's arms came around her waist, his forehead pressing to hers with contentment he'd never thought possible. "Remember our actual wedding? 3 months ago in Nisa, with the white dress and my father trying not to cry?" Celine's smile went soft with the memory. "And you definitely crying?" "I wasn't," Alessandro started to protest. "You were absolutely crying when I walked down the aisle," she said, cutting him off with another kiss. "It was perfect. This time because we wanted to, not because we had to." "Best decision I ever made," Alessandro murmured against her mouth, his voice rough with emotion. "Both times, I love you," Celine whispered, her hands framing his face. Alessandro's response came quiet but absolute, his eyes holding hers. "I love you too." From across the gallery, a voice called out, "Signora, can you explain the Matisse provenance?" Celine squeezed Alessandro's hand once before heading over, and Alessandro watched her go. This woman who'd turned his world upside down and chosen him anyway. They'd left the violence behind, left the danger and the weight of everything his family had been, and ended up in Paris, where their security team had become art critics, and the most dangerous thing in their lives was running out of champagne at exhibition openings. It was perfect. It was absurd. It was theirs. Pietro appeared at his elbow, book still clutched in one hand. "Signore, I have a question about neo-expressionism." "Later, Pietro," Alessandro said, not unkindly. He stood watching his wife light up, while explaining provenance to eager collectors, and thought that normal life was exactly as wonderful as Celine had promised. Even if it came with security guards who could write dissertations on Kandinsky. "Thank you for staying with me through Celine and Alessandro's journey. Now I want to ask you something real. If you had to choose between the life everyone expected you to live and the person who made you feel truly alive, even if it meant walking into danger, even if it meant becoming someone you never planned to be, which would you choose? And here's the harder question. 10 years from now, which choice would haunt you more, the leap you took or the one you were too afraid to take? Tell me honestly in the comments. I want to know what you do. And if this story made you feel something, fear, hope, that ache in your chest when love gets complicated, hit that like button and subscribe. Stories like this only happen when you're here with me.